I'm Briance, founder and CEO of Cultmia, the #1 platform for discovering unique fashion. We scout the world for the hottest designers, bringing their most standout pieces straight to you on cultmia.com. Welcome to our podcast, Behind the Scenes. Join me as I have a conversation with the leading voices in the industry, giving you front row access to what's trending right now. Hi everyone, welcome back to Behind the Scenes. I'm Briance, founder and CEO of Cultmia. Today I have the pleasure of sharing this conversation with Eliana Masgalos. Eliana has been the design lead for womenswear at H&M. She has over 20 years of experience in fashion, spanning creative direction, trend forecasting, and product development. And since joining H&M in 2011, she's held key design and leadership roles across H&M and other stories, driving global development, material innovation, and women's wear design. She's played a really pivotal role in shaping H&M's most iconic collections, most recently leading the Autumn-Winter 2024 collection, and is known for her collaborative approach in uniting design, marketing, and visual storytelling. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So I shared, I would say, a very high-level overview of your career and your bio, which is incredibly impressive, and I'd love for you to walk us through your journey and how you ended up where you are in your role today.
It's been 20 years, sounds like a lot, although I think I love what I do so much, and I think fashion has inspired me all my life. It doesn't feel that long. Yeah. When you say 20 years, it feels like very, very long time. But I think my approach has always been that from the very beginning, I loved the design part and the concept creation and all of that, but I also always wanted to understand better of the 360 of the business. So in order to be a better designer and have more control about how I put products in the market, I wanted to learn a lot more. And that, I think that's how I ended up working in production, closer to suppliers, to understand supply chain, how do supplier understand our requests and what affects, when you get the no on the other side, you kind of know like, okay, I understand why this doesn't work, but I think I can if I tweak it in this way, then maybe it works. So I think that's why I have always end up not necessarily following the common path of being a junior designer, a senior designer, and like only work with design, but instead trying to bring other things into my experience. So at the end, I can have more tools to work around where I am right now. Yeah.
It's amazing all the different hats you've worn and kind of pulling all the different, I would say, like cross-departmental knowledge. And it seems like it's become a real strength in everything that you're currently doing.
And I think also if you're creative, you will always find a way to be creative in the different roles you have. Many people has asked me like, oh, but you work in production. Don't you miss the creativity? I was like, that was probably one of the most creative roles I had because you still can use it so much. So I think it depends a lot on how you are as a person.
That's such an interesting reflection. I think a lot of us would have assumed you need to be literally placed in what we would deem a creative role to be creative, but we should all try and be creative in everything that we do.
Yeah.
I guess turning towards inspiration and creativity, what would you say is your process and kind of the inspiration behind your collections? Do you have a persona or a customer in mind when you think about bringing a collection to life?
I always say, before I even put things on a brief, it always starts in my head. So let's say we start working on autumn-winter collection, and usually it starts in my head and it's there for a couple of months, let's say, and it's like building up. Then it goes into research, because fashion is a feeling. You can't put fashion on a chart or try to guess it on a crystal ball. It's not about that. Fashion is a feeling, and it's usually about what's happening now, and is the current situation in the world and in arts and many parts of the world that affects what is in fashion. So I always say, like, if you're curious and if you are aware of what's happening, then anything can inspire you. And then you start to build. I was also saying the other day, it's a little bit like building movies in my head, because it's always like some kind of context, some kind of world that I'm building for this character that is our customer. Movies, it can come from an exhibition, it can come from anywhere, basically. So if you're curious and you're aware, I think you always find inspiration in everything.
Well, that alone, I would say, will give a lot of people inspiration.
Yes.
This is a slightly different question, but along the same vein. What would you say is the difference between a designer and an artist?
Oh, that's a good one. Because I think, yeah, back in the days, all like created, like that was the designer. And then suddenly we're called designers. And I think for me, it's because when you're a designer, you design with a purpose. And there is always a function to what you design. While if you're an artist, it's probably even more about the feelings, and like you can create anything without any intention of function. I think if you think about the lamp, if you design a lamp and it doesn't give you light, then it's just a piece of art. It doesn't have any function. So I think for me, I always think as the designer should design with a purpose and to a function.
Super interesting, the light example. Next time my light bulb goes out, I'll say that's okay. We can just admire it from a distance. It's beautiful art. As a designer, is it easier to design something you would wear, or can you disassociate your style from when you design?
For me personally, and I don't think this goes for everyone, that's why I say for me personally, somehow it's easier to dissociate and to design for a character. And I think for me, that's why I ended up in a company like H&M, because you can design for so many different women. You don't have to stick to a brand. You don't have to stick to a personal style. And I think for me, that has always been more interesting and more fulfilling than just to create a brand that is so consistent that you know every season you would buy the same thing probably. But if you're designing for H&M, you can really explore so many different women, so many different... I mean, we talk about personal style constantly and self-expression because we believe we are that to our customer, that she should be able to come in and find something that she can restyle and repurpose, and suddenly she has a different look, you know. And I think that's the interesting thing of working in a company like H&M.
H&M has such a welcoming brand where I feel like every character can be represented, so it must be such a fun design job to have, and to really have so many different worlds appear in your mind that you can...
As we say, we're democratic. We like to be for everyone, but we still have our design intention. But we like that we are for so many people because, again, it gives you more space for creating different worlds.
Super, super exciting. And when you think about these different worlds and how they come to life, what would you say has been your favorite H&M campaign?
That's always a tricky one. I mean, I think right now is spring, because it's out now. So, and I think personally, I love to design fall, winter. I live in Sweden, maybe that's a thing. But right now is spring, because also when you go into a collection, you get so involved, and it's like until the launch, I'm so involved in it. So I think you really create a special relation with it. And I'm quite proud actually, because I think this is probably our best spring collection yet, because we broke the rules and we said, oh, maybe the timing for leather is usually not spring, but it's in fashion, so why not?
Let's do it.
You know, so, or maybe we never had boots in spring. Oh yeah, but it's about a festival feeling, so we need boots. So I think it's also like to dare to trust your gut feeling, and I think that's why for me this spring is extra special, because we really dare to push the boundaries and to believe in what we saw and what we felt was what she will want to buy. It's also special because it's two collections in one, so it's like two different takes. Maybe it's like when you have a TV series but you have different episodes, so we called it chapter 1 and chapter 2, and they are very different girls also that I believe complement each other. The overall theme is neo-romantics, but she's still, one of the chapters is very bohemian mixed with rock and festival feeling, while the chapter 2, she's a lot more minimal and still daring and romantic, because there's a lot of decos and sheer, and it's about layering, but it's even newer for us as a brand. So I'm very excited about this spring.
I am too, and I can really feel H&M kind of at the forefront of fashion and really pushing those boundaries and being super innovative when it comes to design and setting trends. And I think your latest collection kind of brings it all to life in the most exciting way. So it's definitely something to be proud of, I think, at least. Turning to your personal style now, could you describe your personal style for us, and do you see it reflected in your work? And you said, kind of answered this one already, saying you can disassociate, but do you see your style sometimes represented in your work as well?
I think in some points you will always see, but it's been an exercise of 20 years actually of trying to dissociate, because when you work in fashion, of course, you have a personal style and sometimes you want to do what you like. But I think for me, it's been more the process the way around, and trying to that is not the first thing, and that is more about something totally different. So yeah, I actually, for me, that's been more the exercise of not letting it interfere. And of course, you will always have a vision as a creative. You have a vision and you have some things that you tend to like always. I think we all do. But I think if you really want to be broad and inclusive and diverse, I think you need to kind of take a step back and try that you don't mix both.
No, that makes sense.
It's complicated, but
it's part of your DNA, but at the same time, it's not. It's someone else's DNA.
Exactly.
It's her DNA.
It's in there somewhere, but it shouldn't interfere too much.
And I guess I didn't mention at the beginning of this episode, but the connecting point between us is because H&M Ventures quite recently invested in Coltmia, which was very exciting for us, and kind of bridging your fashion world and the designers that we work with. I was wondering if you had the opportunity to browse the Coltmia website a little bit, and if you had any favorite brands.
Of course. And I have to say, I mean, I admire what you're doing, because it's really interesting that you bring new names, new creatives to the world. I think that's really impressive, and congratulations on that. I think that's really good. And it's really interesting to see so many designers that you haven't heard about so much before, and they're all gathered into a platform. I think it's really hard to pick one, because they are very different styles as well, and they are very interesting, all of them.
That's a good thing for me.
Yeah.
I like that there wasn't just one.
No, and I also saw that you had an edit on jewelry, and I was quite amazed with all the pieces. They are really beautiful, and I think jewelry is also always an easy way to complement your style. Like, even if you have something really low key, you can always add on. So I really like your latest edit on the jewelry as well. So wonderful. I think, I won't pick one, because I think that would be unfair.
That's the best answer we could have hoped for.
Oh, good.
Could you give us a little bit of a sneak peek into the trends we can expect to see in 2026? I know that you have the most incredible trend forecasting team at H&M.
We do. They're amazing. And we would work with all they called Cahiers de Tendance, because they start in Paris, and like all the trend books, basically. We go to all the fabric fairs and all of that. So basically this team, they dedicate to condense or like gather and condense all the information that might be relevant for us, while me and my colleagues in my role, we take that information and then we translate it into the customer we're targeting. So our trend team works with the full house, with womenswear, kids, men's, social media as well. We have a new approach to social media and understanding what's going on social media and how does that affect. Very interesting. And right now we started to work with a little bit with the spring already next year, but we're pretty much full speed on autumn winter 2025-26 and a holiday campaign as well, and they will be the same as spring, that they have 2 chapters, and that creates an overarching campaign. But of course, some of the products like outerwear, for example, is a much longer lead time with production. So all the products that they involve more craftsmanship or more details, more trims, like outerwear or like leather, like they take a lot longer to develop, but also to produce. That's why we start ahead, actually. While if you compare to jersey or a blouse, that is much quicker. So we kind of have to work in blocks sometimes within the same collection, because we need to target all the different timelines. Right now I'm working with those 2, fall and holiday collections. What can I tell you? I think you have started to see that as well, but it's still a lot of leather. We work both with real leather and synthetic leather, just to give more opportunities to our customer. Fur is super important for fall, so keep an eye on fur.
Okay, great.
And
we need it in London.
Yes, and in Sweden as well.
Yeah.
And denim also in different iterations on the denim. I mean, we know our customer loves denim, but I think the interesting thing with denim this year is that there's so much more opportunity. You can do coatings that make denim look like leather. You can do the trashed denim. You can work with different, more vintage look washes, but also more like intense blues. So it's a lot happening in the denim, and you can work both with jeans but also with tops. It feels like a whole world, and definitely the fur, different lengths also. So it can be very furry, it can be like less, also prints in that range. So yeah, we're very excited about the fall.
A lot of fun textures and options coming. Amazing.
A lot of knits as well, and patterns on knits, checks everywhere. I don't think you will miss the checks.
What I found really interesting, I guess, learning a little bit more about how far in advance you work is when you see trends come out as a shopper, you think it's all very new and it has just been selected and it's just come about. But H&M has handpicked those trends months, if not years beforehand.
Yeah. And I always say my life is a roller coaster, because at some point you hate it, and at some point you love it again, and then you hate it again, and it's part of the creative process as well, and part of it's not produced that quick. You see it for a while and you work with it, and then you're like, this is not good enough, and you push it a little bit more, and it's a process, and then at the end you see it in the campaign and you love it again. But it's a bit of a roller coaster.
You're so familiar with it by the time it's in stores that it's old news for you. And I guess going back again to your personal style and your clothing picks, what would your dream wardrobe look like?
Oh my God, bigger, just bigger.
That's all of our dreams, I think.
Also, when you live in Sweden, I think it's the same in London, but in Stockholm, all the housing spaces tend to be quite compact.
Yeah.
So I would just say bigger, because I feel like I have great pieces in my wardrobe. It's just that you want to extend it.
You need to expand it a little bit more. Excellent. Thinking about, I guess, forward-looking vision, how do you stay inspired? You're 20 years into your career. What a mega milestone. How do you keep pushing the boundaries of design season after season?
I think it's always about staying curious. And I think that's the thing nowadays. It doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter, as long as you're up to date and you're into things and you have that constant need for learning more about things, I think that's what keeps you young and interested in things. And as I said before, I'm obsessed with books. I love books, and I was just in a very cool bookshop here in London the other day, and I bought a few treasures. Very vintage books that you don't find anywhere. And I think every time you open a book, you can go into that whole world and find a whole different inspiration also every time you open, even if it's the same book. So I think that for me is a great source. And cinema as well. I love cinema. I think usually the trends come back every 20 years.
How exciting. You're about to start to see some of your first trends popping back.
Probably. But that's how, when you look at the 90s, there was a big influence from the 70s. And now when we looked at, when I was working with the Spring, for example, I was like, there's a 70s bohemian inspiration. I was like, no, wait a second. This is 70s, but in the 90s.
Yeah.
And it's a bit different. So it's quite interesting. I think I learned that in my first year of history of fashion. And it's quite, I don't think I quite believed the teacher back then, but it's quite interesting how I've seen the patterns now when I've worked in fashion for a while, and you see how they flow and how they come back, but also they take a different iteration and a different approach, and they develop in different ways. So it's quite interesting.
I think it's super fascinating to see over decades kind of what comes back. The one thing I think won't come back is uncomfortable fashion. I remember the days where you could barely bend your legs in these tight denim, it was just a different world. So I think hopefully comfort will be here to stay, but all the best parts of all the best trends will keep popping up over the years. For designers who are just starting out, what would you say is the most important mindset to have when bringing a creative vision to life?
Never give up, basically. It's very important to have a vision, and not only about what you stand for in fashion or how you see fashion, but also about your career. How do you want to drive your career? And I say that to most of our juniors also, where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? And what do you need to learn to get there? It's very important, again, to be curious. Be curious about things, because to be a designer is not just to sit and do nice sketches. It's a lot more than that. That's what has inspired me all my life. So I think it's important to stay inspired and to see the beauty in it and to stay curious, ask questions. And why is that? And like, be curious about the why, because it's not always straightforward, I can tell you. Many times you're going to go around and you don't know where you're going, and you're like, oh yeah, okay, now I understand. So be curious, be persistent, know where you want to go. Also, many times when you're graduating fashion school, you feel like you need to have your own brand. I think that's also part of it, that you need to question yourself, like what, because for me, for example, it was a brand like H&M that I thought was a lot more interesting. So that's also important to know all the ways you could develop into. Also, my advice is always be kind, because it's a tough industry. I really believe you can go really far by being kind with people.
I recently found out that there are over 30 million independent designers out there. It's really, really such a treat for us to have had this conversation with you, leading design for pretty much the most exciting brand out there. So thank you so much. And I think you've given us so much to reflect on and so much to be inspired by. With that, we're going to wrap up with a little bit of this or that. So I will ask you a couple questions and you'll have to pick one or the other.
Okay.
So this or that, romantic or minimalist design?
Minimalist.
That was very easy for you to answer. Power dressing or laid back looks?
Power dressing.
I get that vibe with your choice today. Yeah. Vintage finds or new releases?
I would say mixed. If I have to pick one, new releases.
Okay.
But I still think they take so much from vintage, but it's about the news value maybe.
Okay, that's acceptable. That's acceptable. Summer collections or winter collections?
Winter.
You already told us winter. And then lastly, color or monochrome?
Monochrome.
Amazing.
Personally.
Yes,
For work, I actually love to work with color.
Perfect. These are all Eliana's personal this or that answers. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you
so much for joining us. Discover all the amazing brands we discussed at CultMia.com. We love to offer behind the scenes listeners an exclusive discount. BTS Pod, 10% off your next order.